Good morning and welcome to our safety update webinar for March 2026. I'm Gary Rowe, your host this morning. Let's have a look at what we're going to look at today. Increasingly, we're getting inquiries about conducting rack inspections, and this has largely come from a relatively new Australian standard, which has actually outlined who is competent to conduct rack inspections. So I'll come back to this shortly. I'll also look at this growing area of interest in workplace fatigue. In many years ago, we would have just said to people to suck it in, you've got the job to do, we need you to do this, we need you to squeeze in more, work more time, whatever it may be. We may still have pressure to do this and need to do it, but we need to be mindful of workplace fatigue. WorkSafe Victoria has updated what's the total amount of fines that they've had the courts provide for last year, 2025 calendar year. We'll update you on that shortly. We have a safety networking event coming up later this month, and we'll give you some details about that shortly. A couple of other little cases I'd like to share with you as we go through as well. So welcome once again. Let's kick off. As you know, I sometimes like to start with a safety question, largely just to get our mind thinking around safety. And so my question of the week, and I have two questions today, but here's number one. Can we derate a vehicle loading crane to less than 10 metre tonnes to avoid the crane licence requirement? For example, can we placard this crane to a safe load capacity of 5 metre tonnes? So the regulation outlined in Schedule 3 of the Victorian Safety Regulation says you must have a vehicle loading crane licence if your vehicle loading crane has a capacity of 10 metre tonnes or more. So can I simply place a placard on my dash and say, no, my safe working load, I'm going to operate to only 5 tonnes or 6 or whatever. So there we go. Can we quickly and easily derate something and avoid the need for the operator, you've got a couple of images there, to hold the necessary vehicle loading crane licence? Seems reasonable. If I don't lift more than 10 tonnes, I am not above the 10-tonne limit that requires a licence. Something to think about. The second question is, can police fine drivers if they approach roadside emergency vehicles exceeding 40 kilometres per hour when the emergency vehicles are flashing lights? So a couple of images here to show you, one an ambulance and one a police vehicle. So in most states, we know that we've got a 40 kilometre per hour limit. This is relatively new of recent years that they've introduced this when the emergency vehicles on the roadside have their lights flashing. So now we've got the question, as you approach that, because you might be in a 100 kilometre hour zone and you're approaching and now you see it, can the police stand there with a radar gun and fine you because you approached that scene at greater than 40 kilometres per hour? Okay, there's the question, and we'll come back to it. There's an interesting little twist to this, if I may say as well. So let's just have a quick look. Not everyone here has large, extensive warehousing or racking in your business, but most businesses that hold any product at all will have some racking because they need to store product, bring it in and sometimes hold it for a period of time and move it out. Other businesses, this is in fact what their business is, a logistics business, a warehousing business. So there's many businesses that have extensive racking and some moderate and some actually minor need. But let's just have a quick look. So what I can tell you as a qualified structural engineer and somebody who does numerous inspections of racking in a variety of organisations, large and small, that we invariably will find deficiencies in racking when we inspect it carefully and comprehensively. So number one, almost invariably there will be defects or deficiencies in the racking. But the presumption of many people is they just walk down the aisles, it looks pretty good, so we're okay. So what I can share with you, that we will find minor, hopefully minor damage from forklift impacts. And let's understand, as long as humans are driving forklifts, we will have human error. And forklift drivers are operating in confined space, and the gaps in the racking to put pallets in has very limited space either side of the pallets, and either both beneath and above the pallets. So forklift operators are often working in very constrained areas to both place loads and to retrieve them out of the racking. So it's not unsurprising that we'll see scrapes, dents, and some other minor damage from forklift operation, even if we've got well-trained people that are trying their level best. So there we go. Occasionally we'll see overloaded beams. We've got a safe load for all the racking, and somebody's got a load, either they didn't know or bother to check what's on the pallet as to how heavy it might be, or to compare that against the placarded safe loads. Generally, we don't see a lot of corrosion or rust in racking unless it's outside, and you'll see one of the images here on this is in fact racking that's outside, and in fact the small deficiency that might be alleged in this case here is you can see it's painted, so both blue columns and orange arms, cantilever type racking. The Australian standard recommends galvanised if it's for use outside. However, that's not a legal requirement. It's recommended out of practical purposes because galvanised steel will last a lot longer out in the weather than either painted or powder coated, as you've seen here. We often find the racking, when we look down at the base, particularly if they're older, might have one bolt, if any bolts, to bolt it to the foundations. And often we find the signage is missing to tell us what the safe loading is about racking. So these are the things we typically find. So maybe it's worthwhile just spending a moment to understand there's more than just one type of steel racking. The most common, of course, is steel pallet racking. So what these do, you can see them on the left top image here, racking that take an Australian standard pallet and places them up into various levels of your steel racking. The one below that is what we call cantilever racking, which may be one-sided or two-sided, typically for longer loads, as you see there. Drive-through racking on the top right is where you can have higher density of pallets put together, maybe back to back, and maybe many pallets deep. So you don't have a lot of aisles, you only have one access point, and so the forklift would load into those. Called drive-in or drive-through racking, typically is a common name. There's not much mobile racking around. You'd want to be careful, obviously for stability and for braking if you've had mobile racking. Very little of that we see. A-frame racks typically for light material but tall, as you see there in the middle image I've got there on screen. Maybe you might see this in stores like Bunnings and elsewhere, where you might have either aluminium or steel or timber sections that you might want to just take one or two pieces at a time out. So you might have that. Homemade mild steel racks, bottom right-hand image, not manufactured, so it's by a major manufacturer, but possibly homemade or made by a maintenance person in your business. Big and heavy, robust, but no one knows its safe load capacity. It's not placarded. No one knows who built it many years ago. And people have said to me, do I have to dispose of this? I can answer that later if you like. Low-rise shelving, I haven't got an image of it here, but if it's not loaded with a forklift, it's referred to as shelving, not as racking. So typically it's referred to as shelving, and that doesn't have to meet the Australian standard. But in fact, there's still just general structural good practice that would apply to them. So just briefly, I won't haunt you with all the details, but I want to show you there's a spectrum of Australian standards that apply to steel pallet racking. So if you're familiar with any of the standards around racking, you will know AS 4084 is the main standard referenced in relation to steel storage racking. But that primarily only relates to pallet racking not to cantilever racking and other types. So there's other European standards for pallet racking, cantilever racking, and maintenance of steel racking. And just to show you a bigger list, so here in Australia, AS 4100 steel structures. So those who are designing steel racking would use this, as indeed designers would use AS 1170 structural design actions. We've identified some UK and US standards for cantilever racking as shown there, and drive-through racking, a UK standard for drive-through racking. So we only have one Australian standard that picks up steel pallet racking, and we've then got general structural safety standards for all structures that cover it, but not specifically for the other types of racking. So just so you know, the main standard we're referring to when we talk about steel pallet racking is Australian standard AS 4084, and there's two parts to that. Essentially, one for you and I, because this is around maintenance and operation of the racking, and the other would be around the design aspects of the racking. So who can inspect racking? So this is the question that we've started to get as a result of the most recent version of this Australian standard. They've introduced two new terms, one referred to as informal inspections and the other formal inspections. So informal and formal. For your and my operational purposes, what they actually mean is informal are the internal inspections done by local workers, and the formal inspections are done by a competent person, and generally that will be the rack specialist. So that's the intention of the code. So the code, as well as general principles of what defines a competent person, including out of the Workplace Safety Act and regs, where they had defined what a competent person is, the general principle is that they have appropriate knowledge, skill and experience to perform that work safely. That's the legal requirement. So if you meet that, then you can inspect racking. However, this is where the questions have come from many of our friends and clients, is that the standard specifically by default has listed rack designers, manufacturers and suppliers as competent people to inspect racking for the formal inspections. That's the annual inspection. So the Australian standard recommends annual inspection of racking by appropriate competent people who would normally be the designers, manufacturers or suppliers. So this is where the issues have arisen. Just going back to the informal or internal inspections, just so you know, the standard doesn't tell you how frequently you need to do these. It's up to you as to how heavy is the product loaded into your racking, the turnover of product. So the higher the turnover, the higher the loads that have been placed onto the racking, the taller the racking you might be, then the greater wear and tear on the racking, and would increase the need for you to inspect your racking more frequently. So you might do formal inspections monthly, whereas if you've got low turnover and you're just holding long-term storage, for example, you might think quarterly or 6 monthly internal inspections would be sufficient, and that's okay. So the standard has not defined it, the regulations have not defined it, so you can do your own local brief risk assessment and determine the frequency appropriate for you. So I'll come back shortly to what I recommend is a recommended frequency of inspection. So returning back to the annual or formal inspection, you do need to be have appropriate competence, skill and knowledge to do this. So by default, we know who it's going to be. We know that WorkSafe is increasingly going to say, so who's the competent person who did your rack inspections? You're not in breach, even if you had an incompetent person do it, the inspection, if the racking is safe. So the legal requirement is your racking to be safe. There's not a law that said it had to be inspected or a competent person. Your obligation is to ensure it's safe. How you do that as a business is up to you. Most will continue to use rack suppliers and manufacturers to do their annual inspections. And I think that's okay, particularly if you know you're going to have, expect to have components to be damaged and need replacement. The rack suppliers and manufacturers will have those replacement parts and the team capable and willing to actually install them. Whereas your team may be good at inspecting, but not necessarily carrying out any corrective work on the racking, which you'd need to be careful about doing. So coming back to competence of your team, if your team has been appropriately and adequately trained and have good knowledge and skill and experience working with steel racking, then they can be trained to become and stated as competent to perform your formal inspections. So that is your legal right. You can do this if you like, despite what a rack supplier or manufacturer may tell you, or even what a WorkSafe inspector might say occasionally, because what the WorkSafe inspector is actually advising is the default position, which is the safest position. So you need to be confident your team's is able to do that if you're going to train them. So what I can share with you is a recommended frequency. We think everyone has a hazard reporting system. So daily, you would say, if we spot anything, if any of the team spot anything, they just quickly report it. Maybe the warehouse manager does a weekly walkthrough. This is not even with a checklist, just a weekly walkthrough to observe any obvious bad practice, storage in the racking, or anything obvious about the steel racking. Then you've got your informal inspections. Remember, I told you earlier, they're not specified, could be monthly, quarterly, 6 monthly, depending upon your circumstances, with a checklist is what we recommend. And if anyone wants a copy of that checklist, contact us after today's session. Either email us inquiries@safetyaction.com.au or call our office anytime in business hours, and one of the team will send that out to you. And here's now down to the annual or formal inspection. Safety Action, we provide some training. We've got videos on our website on how to conduct rack inspections. We've got an online certificate course, but it's basic, and therefore we would only recommend that to do the internal or informal inspections. But if people want to be trained up to be competent to do their own formal inspections on an annual basis in your business, we would recommend something like a face-to-face workshop in a facility that has racking, so you can do both theory, training and competency assessment, and practical inspection exercises and competency assessment. And if interested, we can provide a quote. We run typically a half-day workshop to train people who already have experience and knowledge of working with steel racking. That'd be warehouse operatives and forklift operators, for example. Typically, we find a half-day workshop is sufficient to get that necessary knowledge and skills to do that competently. So there's a suggested outline if you have racking in your business. Another topic this month was around workplace fatigue, and I mentioned this at the start of the session. Just a little statement, it surprised me a little bit. I'm sure I've heard it somewhere before, but it struck me. 17 hours awake impairs performance equivalent to 0.05 alcohol. And we all know about 0.05 and the impairment of alcohol, and if you like, drugs as well out there. And I don't know how to rate them in level, but certainly 17 hours, I'm typically not awake for 17 hours, I hasten to add. I like to get my close to 8 hours sleep a night. But I'm sure I have in the past been awake for 17 hours. Maybe I don't like to do it that much these days, but it just goes to show when it's starkly written like that, that it just jumps out at you. So this is what fatigue means. It means we're being impaired, similar to people that are consuming alcohol. And one of the things that I know has been pointed out to me and I've observed in the past, yes, the company needs to have appropriate policies and procedures and watch out for factors like constant tight deadlines, long hours with inadequate rest breaks being prescribed and enforced, maybe unreasonably high workloads, irregular schedules that put sleep patterns out. Night shifts are particularly risky because as humans, we like to sleep at night. That's That's our makeup. And so therefore it is difficult for the vast majority of people and will add to fatigue. So despite all of that, and yes, the company's got to have appropriate policies and procedures, what I can share with you is do not ignore the personal factors. We have found people reporting fatigue, and there's been cases of this. And when people have gone out to their home, their bedroom is at the front of the house, which is subject to high traffic noise on the road. So they're trying to sleep during the day if they're doing night shift. They don't have adequate blackout blinds. They don't have adequate noise suppression. They've looked at the fridge and the diet, and their diet's poor because studies have shown a lot of people doing night shift just grab takeaway food because they don't want to bother cooking, etc. So this is not about they're wrong, but people often need help if you've got particularly working night shift and other extended hours to help people to adjust their personal lifestyle and habits as well to support what the company should be doing. So that's all I want to share today is both sides need to be done. You can do everything you can at the business side. If you don't think of those personal health and lifestyle factors, we are going to experience problems. Just as I've mentioned earlier, our next safety network event is going to be on the topic of contractor management. We're continuing to hear from many friends that this is an area still not fully understood, or they haven't got their mind around it fully yet, or not full controls, or maybe you do, but not all of your team or co-managers understand it. So if you're interested in this, the 31st of March, it'll be here at our conference room here at Safety Action at Clayton. So if you're interested in that, morning tea. So it's just short and sharp between 10 a.m. and midday. We'll have morning tea. So it's a nice social thing as well. Somewhat light-hearted, but we think informative as well. So gain some knowledge and maybe pick up some good network connections as well. Just another case that surprised me that I came across recently. You may have seen this as well. Is unlabeled salt contaminates drinks. So there's your heading. And we all know the good principle, good practice, label all chemicals. And I sometimes have in our safety training, well, the legal requirement is you only have to label if it's a designated hazardous substance. However, it makes sense to label everything. And so in this case, there was salt under the bar, and a cleaner thought, and it was unlabeled, and it was for actually putting around the rim of, margarita cocktails to add some spice to the drink. But it was unlabeled, and a cleaner came along and thought it was the caustic soda, used it to clean the sink, and then topped up the container, which is still unlabeled, with caustic soda. So now the bartender comes back, now is sometime later making margarita cocktails, and is now sprinkled caustic soda around the rim of the drinks. And apparently a number of the people ingested the corrosive chemical and were taken to hospital. So they must have had a reaction that was either severe enough or worrying enough that they actually went to hospital over this. So this is a little bit worrying. So maybe just a little reminder, if somebody says to you, but it's only salt or it's only something else, why are you haunting me over labeling it? Maybe you can just remember this simple case, cocktail drinks in a bar, and the unlabeled salt under the sink. Another one, a case that I just came across recently, and the heading is reality beats perception in psych claim. So reality beats perception. So a Queensland Industrial Relations Commissioner found that a worker's view of management, that their actions were unreasonable, was perception rather than reality. So what the Commissioner found here is that the company had appropriate policies and procedures, and by all evidence, looked like they had followed those correctly. So the company has got clear and what appears to be appropriate policies and procedures, and has done their best and has followed those. And sometimes, if the person's still unhappy, it doesn't make it real. And so it's just nice that occasionally we hear from courts and tribunals and commissions that that your actions as companies, when they are appropriate and correct, are seen as such and supported. And this is not against the person themselves here. It's just merely reflecting human nature. Sometimes where people can be so embittered that they will not recognise that what you've done is in fact correct and appropriate, even though they don't like it. It's a bit like the police pull you up for speeding. The police are correct, but we don't like it. So let's understand that reality trumps perception when considering the facts. So I just thought I'd share that one with you before we get to the end and return to those two questions that I posed to you earlier on. So let's have a look. Question of the week: can we derate a vehicle loading crane to less than 10 metre tonnes to avoid the licence requirement? E.g., can I place a placard on the dash that says safe load only 5 metre tonnes or 6 or whatever? So I came across an article, Queensland WorkSafe have said no, and they've declined that an employer who derated a crane in that one manner, they've not accepted that. But I say, yes, you can derate a crane. But here's the point. There's some provisos on this. Yes, but only if you can ensure the derating is physical, not just a sign, physical. So and it is non-reversible. So in the explanation paper from Queensland WorkSafe, they declined what had been done because it was not a physical control. It was only advice, instruction and signage. So the lowest level under the hierarchy of control. And they said correctly that it was easily reversible. So even a restriction valve in the hydraulics to reduce its capacity would not be enough, because they said future maintenance might replace that component back to the original valve. So if you can derate it in a physical way that it cannot be overridden in any reasonable way by the operator, and it is non-reversible, therefore I might weld something onto it to restrict the movement of the valve or somehow restrict its power, then you have actually satisfied that you have adequately, that you have physically and permanently derated the crane. You are now below the 10 metre tonnes. So with a proviso, you can. Oh, I do apologise. Okay. Apologies. Question number 2. Can the police fine drivers if they approach roadside emergency vehicles exceeding 40 kilometres per hour when the emergency lights are flashing? And the answer is no. The police cannot fine you obeying the posted speed limit as you approach an emergency scene. As you approach, the law is you must pass the emergency vehicle at the posted, at now the prescribed 40 kilometres per hour. And I hasten to add, we're reminded by one of our Toyota dealer friends in South Australia that in South Australia, different to all other jurisdictions in Australia, impose a 25 kilometre per hour speed limit, passing emergency vehicles with the flashing lights on. So the Department of Transport also give a warning that advice: before braking, check your rear vision mirror and slow down safely. There've been recorded accidents where people have seen the flashing lights, slammed on the brakes, and have had nose to tail accidents and maybe significant shunts. And some of these could be quite dangerous when people dangerously brake in high speed areas. So you need to give the vehicles behind you adequate notice by applying the brakes gently. So your brake lights are on, they're on for longer. You're now progressively slowing down. So the law is you pass, by the time you reach the emergency vehicles, you need to be doing 40 kilometres per hour at that point. And in South Australia, down to 25 kilometres per hour. That's incredibly slow. Well, if you think about that, if you're out on a 110 kilometre per hour freeway or highway. So there's the rules for that circumstance. So that brings us to the end of our if you like, our morning coffee update on safety. Thanks for joining us as always. Hopefully you've got something out of today. Andrea was busy this morning and unable to join. I spoke to her earlier today. I think she was going to be travelling at this time. So thank you to those who also think of us when you've got safety needs. Always happy to chat to you and provide a quote if it's appropriate for us to help you with anything to do with workplace safety and business risk. So thank you once again and have a great weekend. We'll see you next month. Bye.